Right, Daniel chapter 8. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision, after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came towards the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and towards the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people?" He said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, "Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision." As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. "Son of man," he said to me, "understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep, with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, "I am going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The 4 horns that replaced the one that was broken off represent 4 kingdoms that will emerge from his nation but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given you is true, But seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding.
Good morning. Did you notice that last verse that Glenys read to us? I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. I know exactly how he feels. When you first read that chapter, you think, goodness me, what is this all about? Fortunately, we do have an interpretation by Gabriel. But it's a great testimony of Daniel that in spite of his deep concern and trouble about the future, he went about the king's business. He got up and he continued faithfully in his service of the Babylonian society. Now, before I try to unpack chapter 8, let me give a very brief recap of chapter 7. In chapter 1, Daniel and the 3 other Hebrew boys were taken captive when Babylon conquered Israel. This was about 605 BC. And you remember, after 3 years' education, the 4 boys outperformed all the other trainees. Yes, you can just about see that. Now, chapters 2 to 7, we've got this sort of mirror image where the top half is a mirror image of the bottom half, and they come in pairs. Chapters 2 and 7 are parallel stories about 4 kingdoms being replaced by a 5th. In chapter 2, Daniel describes and interprets Nebuchadnezzar's disturbing dream, you remember, of a statue, though the court magicians couldn't. In chapter 7, Daniel's vision of 4 winds and of 4 great beasts is of seemingly uncontrollable forces. And chapters 3 to 6 are also parallel stories about how God's people are tested. You remember in chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to the golden idol and was rescued by God from a fiery death. And in chapter 6, Daniel refuses to treat King Darius as God's chief representative. So God delivers him from the lions, and Darius learns to respect the God of Daniel. So that's a very brief recap of those chapters. And chapters 4 and 5 are the central chapters. That's where the key themes are. And you remember that Daniel interprets a dream for Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 and 5. He interprets a handwriting on the wall for Belshazzar. And these are the key themes. That the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. We are going to see this again in this chapter 8. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. So, one of the things I should mention, that Daniel 2 to 7 focuses mainly on the destinies of Gentile world powers. And in chapters 8 to 12, the emphasis is on the destiny of Israel. It is at this point in chapter 8 that Daniel changes from Aramaic to Hebrew. Aramaic was a common language of the time. Hebrew was the language of the Jews. So this is for the Jews, this next lot. I want you to imagine a future hypothetical scenario. Britain is no longer a sovereign state, but is governed by a superpower from some other country. And the ruler is dreadful. He worships a pagan god and believes himself to be the embodiment of God, or that false god on earth. He thinks that this God is revealed in him, and he expects everybody to worship this God. Now, as Christians, we acknowledge only one God, and we worship one God, him alone. And so we refuse, or some Christians refuse, to worship this false God. Consequently, the evil ruler issues an edict stating that Christianity is now an illegal religion. And the following laws have been passed, which make our lives intolerable. 1, all Bibles must be handed in to be burned. After this, anyone in possession of a Bible will be executed. 2, It is now illegal to recognize Sunday as a holy day, a day of rest when we can worship God. Indeed, Christian worship has been banned. Anyone found to be worshipping God will be executed. 3, christening, dedication of children, baptism or communion is illegal. Anyone caught practicing any of these things will be put to death. St. Paul's Cathedral has now become the temple of this false religion. All references to Christianity have been removed and replaced by the paraphernalia of this pagan god. And 5, religious police roam around the country to ensure that all citizens participate in this false religion. Failure to do so means certain death. That is one scary scenario, isn't it? But this is exactly what Daniel is talking about, but about the Jewish people. This is the situation he's prophesying about, a time that's going to come when these things will happen to the Jews, so replacing Britain and Christianity with Palestine and Judaism. And his vision foresees what will happen to the Jews over the next 400 years. Now, you notice that there's a lot of references to horns. The horn is frequently found in Scripture to represent the power or the military power of a nation. So the size of the horn will represent how strong that nation is. Okay, so what I want to do, fortunately we do have an interpretation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, if you can see that, the vision, the prophecy is in verses 3 to 14. So I'm just going to have to get my table. And the interpretation is on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do, if you've got your Bibles with you, it might be useful just to refer to these. I'm going to go through the details of the prophecy and then the interpretation. And fortunately, we have historical evidence, documents, whether it be Jewish or extra-biblical. We have historical documents which can dovetail in the interpretation, which I hope will happen anyway. We'll see. I think you might find it interesting. I did. So I'm going to just, I've got the ESV, not the NIV. So some of the words are slightly different. So the first verse, verse 3, I'm just going to read it out and you can just see the summary there. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high. Long, I think we had in our reading. But one was longer or higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue him from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. So there's the summary. We've got 2 horns. One horn is higher or longer. Charge from to the west and the north and to the south. And here's the that Gabriel gives, the interpretation. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. Now, the Medo-Persian Empire lasted a long time, from 559 to 331 BC. We've already met Belshazzar on the very first verse of this chapter. Darius is another person we're going to meet. We've met him once before with the writing on the wall. And Cyrus. Cyrus was the one who basically brought these 2 kingdoms together, these 2 horns together. And they came down from Persia, which is sort of up there, and they went down there and everywhere, okay? They were the more dominant power, the Persians, or the Iranians as they are today. So the next verse is verse 5 to 7. Let's just read that. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was engaged against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. There was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. So here we have a goat with conspicuous horns, came from the west, this way. Is that right? West, yes. From your point of view, that's west, I think. Now, it says here in verse 21, the interpretation, and the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. And the first king, of course, was Alexander the Great. Remember him? 336 to 323, not a very long reign. And he quickly conquered Persia. Came from the west, Greece was in the west, and he quickly conquered Babylon and Persia, and the Greek culture spread. Moving on to verse 8, the first part of verse 8, then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. There it is, height of his power. When he was strong, the height of his power, the great horn was broken. And verse 22 says this, and as for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. So I should have read the second part of verse 8. Yeah, Alexander died in 323. He died at the height of his power. I think that he caught some sort of fever. It might have been malaria or something in 323. So it wasn't very long. It was a very short, 12 years, I think it was, something like a short time. And he conquered, they reckon it was 1.5 million square miles of area that he conquered, something like that. It's amazing. But he died at the height of his power. And then we read that instead there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of the heaven. Yep, there it is. It's not very clear, is it? No. Should have done a different colour maybe. But this is interesting now because Alexander, after he died, 4 of his generals divided the kingdom into 4 parts. There was Egypt and Palestine called the Ptolemies, Babylonia and Syria called the Seleucids, Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, Macedonia and Greece, which is still there. 4 parts. That's amazing, isn't it? 1 horn, 4 horns. So it's all fitting in, isn't it, nicely? We hope, anyway. Are you with me so far? Okay, good, because I'm lost. So, carrying on, verse 9. It says, out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Okay, so we've got this little horn. There it is there. So it grew in power to the south. So here's, it went south, it went east for you, and went to the glorious land, which is Palestine, Israel, Judah. And we can see here there was one person who came out of the Seleucids, one of the 4 kingdoms. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV Epiphanes. I forgot to say, the Seleucids conquered Palestine from the Ptolemies in 198 BC. And from that reign, or from that empire, came Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And he reigned from 175 to 164. And he attacked Israel, the glorious land. He was an evil man. He wasn't a very nice man at all. And it says in verse 10, it grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as a prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown, and the host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. This is Antiochus. So we see there that he sets himself up to be as great as a prince of the host. And the daily sacrifices was taken away, and the sanctuary was overthrown. Now, in verse 24, it says, his power shall be great, but not by his own power. He shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. The high priest was assassinated by Antiochus in 170 BC, and the godly believers were attacked. He saw himself as Zeus Epiphanes. On his coins, this was stamped on his coins, Zeus Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He looted the temple. He replaced the daily worship of God with worship of Zeus. He desecrated and removed the altar in October 168, and in December he installed an altar to Zeus, and he died in 164. Verse 13. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgressions that make desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary, and hosts to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. And verse 26, the vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. Now, from 170, when Antiochus attacked God's people, the high priest, until he died in 164, is roughly 6 years, which is 2,300 days, roughly. So a little over 6 years period from 170 BC to when the high priest was assassinated to December 164, when Judas Maccabeus cleansed and rededicated the temple. Wow, I'm glad I got through that. Did you follow that roughly? Now, according to Jewish history, Antiochus IV was an enemy of the Jewish religion. We know that. He had decreed in an edict that Judaism should cease to be practiced. This is what happened. Sacrifices were stopped. Observance of the Sabbath was a capital offense. Possession of the Torah, their Bible, was a capital offense. All copies had to be burned. Mothers who circumcised their babies were put to death as well as their child. Pagan altars were erected throughout the land. Jews were forced to sacrifice to Zeus and eat pork. Those who refused were killed. So life in Israel during this period of suffering would have been intolerable for the faithful Jew. Many gave in and turned their back on Judaism. They worshipped Zeus. They ate pork. But there was a group of Jews called the Hasidim, loyal ones, who resisted Antiochus. And one such pious Jew was called Mattathias, got to get it right. And he lived a few miles outside of Jerusalem. And he refused to sacrifice to Zeus, but he was visited by one of Antiochus's officers to try and persuade him to worship Zeus. Well, Mattathias killed the officer and fled to the hills with his son. And he became a national hero, and young men flocked to join him in the hills, and he became quite famous. He put his son Judas in command and began waging a guerrilla war against Antiochus' troops. This became known as the Maccabean Revolt, named after the nickname of Judas, Maccabee, which means the hammer. So Judas Maccabeus was Judas the Hammer. And he led the resistance army and won victory and victory and victory over Antiochus' army. And after 3 years, the enemy was driven out. And in December 164, in fact, it was the 25th of December, Judas and his men restored the temple and reconsecrated the altar, as prophesied in verse 13 and 14. The story is told that whilst clearing the temple of the rubbish and idols, a single small bottle of oil was found, which still had the seal of the high priest on it. Now, this oil was used to light the lamps. There had to be a continual lamp alight all the time in the temple, and it was used to fill up the oil lamp and light it. So they filled one of the oil lamp and they lit it. And each day they returned to carry on with their clearing out work. They found the oil lamp still alight. In fact, it lasted for a full 8 days. So today's Jews commemorate this victory over their enemy by having an 8-day celebration called Hanukkah, in which they light oil lamps or candles on a special 8-branched candelabra during November and December. Okay, well, that's the history bit. Let's go on to the application bit. What can we learn from Daniel's vision? Well, it concerns the theme of the previous chapters, that God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of men. And I want to just talk about 4 various people and circumstances. How am I doing for time? Have I got time? Yeah. Okay. First of all, the exiled Jews. Daniel's vision is clearly applicable to the Jews of his own time during the exile. They were desperate to go back to Jerusalem, to their homeland. Daniel's message was a message which provided an answer to their cry of, "How long, Lord?" These exiled Jews were given hope regarding God's plan for their future. Even though they were in slavery and they were being persecuted in a pagan country, God is still sovereign and God is still in control. Their exile is not permanent. They will return to their beloved land. In fact, this did happen under Cyrus, who was a benevolent king. He allowed the Jews to go back to their land of Judah, and he even sent back some of the treasures from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. And Daniel was still around at that time, so he saw that part of the vision fulfilled. He's an example of loyalty to God's law, Daniel is. His aim was to rekindle the faith of the Jews, to summon them to unyielding loyalty, even in the face of exile and slavery. And the second lot of people that we can apply it to is the 2nd century Jews of BC. The vision also speaks to the Jews in Israel during the 2nd century BC. This is the time of the evil rule of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The vision was given to prepare God's people for the coming evil events. If the cry of the exiled Jews was, "How long, Lord?" the cry of these Jews would have been, "Where are you, God? Why is this happening to us?" Daniel's vision reassures them that God will overcome evil and his power and justice will prevail. God will be triumphant. So they should never give up their faith or lose hope. God is sovereign over the course of all history, even over those who rebel against him and seek to destroy him. We see this in verse 25, where it says that Antiochus will be destroyed, but not by human power. It is thought that Antiochus became ill and died suddenly in 164 BC. It is God who determines when his reign of terror ends. The third lot of, or the third age, is the end times. In verse 17 of Daniel's vision, it says this: "As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. 'Son of man,' he said to me, 'understand that the vision concerns the time of the end.'" Now, some commentators think that Daniel's prophecy and its first fulfillment during the 2nd century BC foreshadow events which will occur during the end times. Antiochus is thought to be an archetype of the person often called the Antichrist, who, according to scriptures, or some scriptures, will rise through the power of Satan and rule over the earth, even demanding to be worshipped. This power will only be broken by the return of Jesus. But before Christ returns, life will become intolerable for all Christians when faith will be severely tested. The scenario I described at the beginning of my talk may well happen in the distant future. But whatever happens, God has a plan. History is moving inevitably and by a preordained plan towards the establishing of the kingdom of God and Christ returning in power. And finally, Christians today, we are very fortunate living in Britain because it is a free country. We're not faced with persecution on a daily basis. Yet there are thousands, if maybe millions of Christians in the world today who face real persecution. They're imprisoned, they're tortured, they're killed, yet their faith in God's sovereignty is often so strong. But you can understand why Christians such as these sometimes cry out, "Where are you, God? Why are you allowing this to happen to me?" And that's the problem of evil in this world. And that's a sermon topic in itself. I'm not going to touch it. I won't dwell on it now, but I will say this one thing, though. God's plan for human history sometimes includes his sovereign use of evil people. Just because evil leaders seem to abound, we should not feel that God is absent or unconcerned. Now, bringing it down to a personal level, we may be facing our own challenging circumstances. We may also be asking the question, why, God? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Whatever those circumstances are, no matter how bad things seem to be, God is still with us and is concerned for us. He will give us the strength to get through those difficult periods of our lives. We should not give up on our faith or should lose hope. Daniel's message is that God is sovereign. Everything that happens in the world, to nations and to us, both now and the future, is all part of God's plan. Now, I find that marvelously reassuring to know that he is in control. And I just want to finish by just reading to you about a man who awful things happened to him. So I just read, and I'm not going to comment on it until afterwards, perhaps. It's shocking how quickly comfortable life can turn into a nightmare. In 1870, lawyer and church elder Horatio Spafford and his wife Anna were an affluent couple with extensive real estate along the shore of Lake Michigan, when their contentment was shattered by the loss of their 4-year-old son from scarlet fever. That's the first thing that happened to them. The following year, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed all their properties. That's the second thing. To ease his wife's deep depression and lift the spirit of his 4 daughters, Horatio arranged for them all to take a trip to Europe in November 1873. On the day they were due to leave, Horatio was faced with a sudden business emergency, so he sent Anna and the family on ahead with the plan that he would follow a few days later. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, their steamer was struck by a British iron sailing ship and sank within 12 minutes. Out of 307 passengers, only 81 were rescued, one of them being Anna Spafford. Anna spoke later of how she remembered being sucked violently downwards when her baby, Tanetta, was ripped from her arms by heavy debris. Their older daughters, Maggie and Annie, clung to a piece of wood for almost an hour before they wearily lost their grip and floated away to their death. Their younger sister, Bessie, was never seen or found. When Anna finally reached Cardiff, she sent Horatio a telegram with a brief and heartbreaking message, "Saved alone." Horatio immediately set sail on another ship to bring his wife home. Several days later, he was called to the bridge by the captain when the ship passed the place where it was reckoned the tragic steamer had gone down. That night, alone in his cabin with a faith that never faltered, Horatio penned these words: "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." Marvelous. Who among us, faced with such dreadful tragedy, could write these words? Not just of acceptance and deep faith, but of thanks, hope, and praise. Believing without doubt that God was good and that he would see his daughters again in heaven, Horatio and the family, including the 2 other young daughters they'd been blessed with afterwards, they finally fulfilled their lifelong wish to live in Jerusalem. In the old part of the city, they established the American colony to bring both practical help and the love of Jesus to the needy, sick, and homeless. Their own loss gave them deeper compassion for the suffering of others. They proved so inspirational that their work and legacy continues in the Spafford Children's Centre in Jerusalem to this very day. Horatio and Anna believe that God's hand was in everything that happened to them and their family, everything that happened and their family. And although the loss of their beloved daughters and little son broke their hearts, they trusted that through God all would be well. Their faith came through triumphant and strong. And Horatio's generous, faithful, remarkable verses have since brought comfort to so many who suffer loss and pain. Now, that's amazing, I think. It's an amazing story. So I'm just going to pray, and then we're going to sing that song.